Great, we may start in 1 minute. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the 8th lecture of the 58th public lecture series of the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. Moving on with the archaeology of Cyprus, it is my honor to welcome and introduce our today's speaker, Luca Bombardieri, Associate Professor in Aegean and Cypriot Archaeology at the University of Siena. He previously served as lecturer and associate professor in Aegean prehistory and Near Eastern archaeology at the University of Florence and Torino in Italy. Dr. Bombardieri received his MA and doctoral title in archaeology and ancient history at the University of Florence under the supervision of Paolo Emilio Pecorella. He participated in numerous research projects in Iraq and Italy, as well as in Syria, where he supervised the excavation of the Neo-Assyrian palace at Tel Pari Kahat. In Cyprus, Luca participated in the Kouris Valley project in 2007 to 2008, while he has been leading the scientific team of the Erimi Archaeological Project since 2009, focusing on fieldwork and other research activities at the Middle Bronze Age Laonin Tuporaku in collaboration with the Department of Antiquities of the Republic of Cyprus. Luca is also co-director of the book series Studi Cyprioti and member of the scientific board of the Cahiers d'études Cypriotes. His research covers a broad range of interests, including aspects of social organization and ideology of prehistoric communities in Cyprus, the prehistory of Mediterranean islands, and contemporary reception of Mediterranean prehistoric art and ideology. He has published and co-edited 6 monographs on the site of Erimi and on aspects of identity and connectivity, while he has also signed numerous articles on an impressive range of topics related to the archaeology of Cyprus, the Aegean, and the Near East. Closing this introduction, I would like to kindly ask all our participants to switch off their cameras and mute their microphones. Should you wish to address a question or comment to our speaker, feel free to use the chat button on Zoom. You may also switch on your cameras after the end of the presentation to address your question directly to the speaker by raising your hand and unmuting a microphone. Dear Luca, we very much look forward to hearing about your ongoing field research at Erimi in the Kouris Valley. My colleague Maria Iacob and I will coordinate the Q&A session following your presentation. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to see all of you here, and thank you very much for the invitation. I participated to the public lecture organized by the Archaeological Research Unit some years ago, and it's still really emotional for me to present the results of our research at Erimi to such a wonderful audience of colleagues and to this environment related to the archaeology of Cyprus. So thank you very much to Thanasis and to Maria for inviting me particularly. And in my presentation today, I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you and hopefully with you, of course, about social practices in Middle Bronze Age Cyprus, pointing to the case of Erimi communities in the valley of Kouris River. So I'm going to share
yes, please.
A PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, I think you can see everything.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Very good. Through the description and interpretation of specific evidence recovered from the central workshop complex, as well from residential and funerary areas at Erimi, I'd like to explore and discuss the possible connection of foundation and abandonment activities with ritualized practices performed by the community to ensure and sustain long-term social cohesion and to construct social memory and identity. I'm aware of the difficulties involved in distinguishing ritual spheres of activities from those of the everyday, because the acts which create these layers of meaning often leave no clear trace when we refer to a prehistoric context. Thus, what I want to consider this evening is how material practices embedded in daily life activities can inform about communal ritual processes. And I selected for this reason two key moments of settlement life history at Erimi: the foundation and the abandonment, illustrating the evidence of possible ritualized acts connected with them. But before moving to Erimi, let's begin with a glimpse into the broader picture of Middle Bronze Age on the island. The actual lack of reliable datasets, context, and models has traditionally confined the Cypriot Middle Bronze Age in a sort of interpretative gray zone. A rather undetermined buffer zone between two periods and two concepts easy to detect: the village on the one hand, the city and its urban society on the other. The positive effects of both updated analysis of old excavated contexts and new excavation projects jointly contributed to gradually free the Middle Bronze Age from its gray zone. Final publication of Ambelikua Letri and the ongoing publication of legacy data from Middle Bronze Age Lapitos by Jenny Webb and her team, along with the successful new excavation directed by Lindy Crew and by Despopulidis at Kisonarga and in the Iosazomenos area, and a very recent final publication of the resumed excavation at Middle Bronze Age Alhambra Muttes by Andrews Neddon, significantly contributed to this process of liberation. What Jenny Webb and Bernard Knapp have recently argued as a disappearing Middle Bronze Age in the traditional scholarly debate is taking a more and more distinct phase, and suggests that the widely acknowledged internationalism of late Bronze Age Cyprus had its antecedents in the Middle Bronze Age, and that the changes which mark the closing years of the Middle Bronze Age period represent a culmination of an evolving serial of internal developments and external interaction, end quote. With new premises, we are now facing a sort of Middle Bronze Age reloaded. Changes in the nature of society become more evident during the latest phase of this period, when new social identities and relationships emerged, transforming the household-based society of early Bronze Age into a more complex system that foreshadowed the Cyprus' later urbanization. This phenomenon, far from being univocal and linear, should be rather examined by analyzing the organization of the community in different regional districts and on the longue durée perspective. In this perspective, the Middle Bronze Age site of Erimi belonging to Poraco offers a good case study to investigate this phenomenon, as it includes a range of key contexts to analyze social, cultural, and economic developments of Middle Bronze Age in Cyprus. The site of Erimi belonging to Poraco was first identified in 2007 as the results of a survey project aimed at outlining the landscape use and ancient occupation in the valley of Kouris River. The evidence of key topographic attributes and surface analysis let us keep on intrasite analysis conducted by the Italian Archaeological Project, now based at the University of Siena and supported by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in collaboration with the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus. 15 years, almost 15 years of dedicated fieldwork analysis have revealed that the settlement of Erimi was organized in distinct functional areas constructed on sloping limestone terraces. On the top of the hill, the productive area A, which has been identified as a multifunctional workshop which extends over 45 by 35 meters, area and is principally designed for dyeing and textile activities. On the first sloping terraces, the residential areas, area B and T2, T3, and a cemetery extramural on the lower southern terraces, area A. The analysis of ceramic assemblages has indicated an occupation throughout the Middle Bronze Age period, as most of the locally produced types of red polish ware are characteristic to the Middle MC2 to MC3 period repertoire, with significant imports of drab polish and red polish 3. Plain white ware is a recent addition to the usual assemblage of the local ceramics from the site and was recognized in the final levels of occupation and in specific units in the workshop complex. Additional, a total of 17 radiocarbon determination confirmed the ceramic interpretation, mostly confirmed, also employing Bayesian modeling of data by indicating the initial phase of settlement occupation at the very beginning of Middle Bronze Age, NC1, or AC3 NC1, and in its abandonment phase before LC1. Since 2016, new investigation in the southwestern area of the settlement in area T1 revealed new interesting evidence of organization in the settlement planning and segregation between inhabited and funerary areas at Rimini. The investigation in this area revealed a massive wall structure that outlined the settlement to the west, following the natural edge of the hill. The wall is average 1.70 meter width, a cut within the bedrock, the limestone natural bedrock, a cut within the natural limestone bedrock of 0.50 meter deep was done to create the foundation of the structure and filled with rubble stones and large stone blocks with plaster mortar. This impressive wall structure, whose actual extension is more than 95 meters, appears as a sort of circuit wall that can separate the settlement and the cemetery and can be presumably ascribed to the most recent phase of occupation of the settlement during the latest phase of Middle Bronze Age. A series of 4 elliptical shallow pits were found on the exterior of the wall. They were displayed in a line at the same distance from the wall and contained 3 complete vessels properly deposited on the bottom of these pits. The complete absence of other residues or objects within these basins and the lack of other working-related structures in the same area suggests that these elliptic features were not used as working installation. Instead, they could have been related to the wall construction episodes, so they can possibly be connected to some form of foundation of ritual necessary for the construction of such relevant architectural feature. The focus investigation on textile production is of a greater relevance in the analysis of the prominent workshop complex. This productive atelier, located on the top of the hill, reached an extension of more than 700 square meters. The complex is coherently organized in a series of outdoor spaces equipped with basins, drains, and hanging wooden frames used for dyeing the fabrics and then drying them to the wind, as well as roof space with systems for locking and controlling of the entrance and the exit of the semi-finished and finished products. On the back wall or along the sides of the roof units, numerous large containers for storage of raw materials and finished products have been found. Stone mortars and grinders, small basin probably for fixing colors, circular clay hearths and cooking pots, generally tripods, were presumably used also for the extraction of the pigment that is necessary for the dyeing process. The processing structure and storage spaces, together with the residual artifacts and raw materials from the more recent phase of occupation in the workshop area, are evidence of a complete textile chain operatoire, consisting of the subsequent and diversified activities of spinning, weaving, and dye yarns and fabrics. Analysis on the botanical remains found inside of these structures have indicated that the plants collected and processed belong to the family of Borraginaceae, whose roots, once dried and boiled in water, products a pigment with red-violet tones. The aim of investigating textile activities at Erimi is to explore both practical and symbolic aspects of textile production and consumption. A symbolic value and perhaps ritual significance of both textile tools and spaces of textile processing appear specifically embedded into communal space as the cemetery and, most of all, in the workshop complex. This is the case of one very important unit we excavated in 2018-2019. Unit SA5 of the workshop complex is a roofed space of 9.50 by 6 meters, peculiar both in terms of its features and function. The analysis of stratigraphic deposits revealed that a large limestone dressed monolith measuring more than 2.30 meters collapsed in the center of the room in the last phase of occupation at the very end of Middle Bronze Age. The stone was originally standing on the northern section of the unit. Additionally, a large red polish amphora and a circular fireplace in limestone blocks were just facing the monolith in the opposite southern area, while a series of 11 shallow rounded basins were set along the sides and at the center of the unit. These major units appears functionally connected with two smaller annexes. We call them SA14 and SA15. In this one, a complete kitchen installation is located, thus forming, the three units, SA5, 14, and 15, a sort of homogeneous architectural compound. The peculiarities of context suggest that this compound may have had different function compared to the other investigated units, and we presume a ritual use for this compound. Further analysis and future investigation will provide us with stronger evidence to support the interpretation of this compound as a ritual space, what we can probably define like a small shrine, presumably connected with the productive activities of the complex and its ideological function. The excavation of these structures also revealed the occurrence of a small rounded deep basin carved into the base of the western wall. Within this circular feature, we found an intact juglet, as mentioned in the case of the circuit wall. Also in this case, we can assume that the circular feature was not carved to be used as a setting for a wall support due to the presence of the intact juglet within. So we can presume that this circular feature and the intentional deposition of the juglet within were possibly connected with the construction of this peculiar building unit. Latest 2022 excavation, let's say this last summer, in the southern unit SA8 in the workshop complex, revealed an analogous deposition of a complete red polished bird-shaped ascos within a shallow basin. So we have different evidence of a possible similar kind of operation and act. Turning back to the standing monolith, it is worth mentioning that a comparable but small size shaped stone has been also included in the funerary assemblage of the single chamber tomb 467 excavated in 2018. This is an elongated dressed stone, presumably volcanic rock, with scanty traces of peak into shape, and was originally allocated in a sort of rectangular niche in the southeastern section of the tomb chamber. The stone appears to be coated by a thin white pyrogenic lime plaster layer, and a vivid red pigment has been applied on its top. SAM and FTIR analysis revealed that the red pigment is rich in iron due to the presence of hematite. None of the local red sediments analyzed so far shows similar composition, possibly suggesting that the raw material was deliberately selected and sourced in a more distant locality. At this stage, a set of questions may be raised up by analyzing our dataset from Middle Bronze Age Eremi. First, how the possible workshop, shrine, and monoliths from productive and funerary contexts can be compared with available evidence for ritual paraphernalia from early and Middle Bronze Age Cyprus. And second, and this is the question, can we really imagine a common and shared set of ritual elements and structures across the island during such a long period? It is well known that we have no record of proper religious architectures in Cyprus before the emergence of urban communities during the late Bronze Age. Thus, in detecting ritual spaces and activities in and proto-urban context, the focus is primarily on two sources of evidence: decorated funerary shrines and terracotta model of shrines. 3 tombs at Carmi, 3 at Vunus Site A, and several at Lapitos have carved features in the dromoi. The most remarkable are those associated with Carmi Paleolona Tomb 6, the celebrated Tomb 6 from Paleolona cemetery. Here, a standing anthropomorphic relief figure is flanked by 2 relief pilasters to the right of the chamber entrance. Additionally, the chambers of Carmi Paleolona Tomb 2, 6, and 15A have a shallow central buttress or rock cut pier on the rear wall. Therein, Tomb 6 has a central cut pilaster topped by a pair of horns. Similar buttresses chambers occur in at least 14 tombs at Lapitos, dated back mainly to the EC2 period. Some of these have a horseshoe-shaped ridge extending from the foot of the buttress in the shape of a heart. In some others, truncated buttresses were associated with small recesses cut into the floor and back wall containing large jars. The evidence from funerary contexts on the north coast can be paralleled with that of the ritual terracotta models. Given the presence of the tripartite facade, it seems reasonable to suggest that the Carmi figure carved in the dromos of Tomb 6 is to be equated with a female figure which stands in the front of a large jar before a similar 3-part facade on the 2 well-known terracotta models, especially the one found in the vicinity of Marquis Alonia. Turning back to Eremi, from this long journey to the north and central Cyprus and through the early and middle Bronze Age, we may notice that some of the elements we found out connected to ritual in those contexts appear reinterpreted in this South Coast community at the very end of Middle Bronze Age. The rock-cut piers may be parallel to the standing monolith, maybe, as well as the earth and the jar standing at the base of these standing elements may be interpreted likely. Again, maybe. This is a scanty evidence in a wider picture of the Eremi community we are trying to trace back, and we are going to trace back in the next minutes of my talk today. As mentioned above, An extramedullary cemetery area extends toward the east and south of the settlement at Erimi, where 23 tombs have been excavated. Sorry. The southern cluster was more extensively exposed in the area A, where a series of 15 rock cut tombs were excavated, while 2 series of rescue excavation conducted by the Department of Antiquities in the nearby area of Ipsonas Vuneros in 1919 and 2012 revealed a coeval additional funerary cluster to the east of the top hill. Funerary assemblages confirmed the extended range of inter-regional trade network which Erimi was involved in during the expansive phase of its economic growth in the Middle Bronze Age, which also produced an evident degree of social differentiation within community members or kin groups. It may be argued as another possible consequence of the successful industry and trade activities at Erimi, and appear demonstrated by the presence of special burials with particularly rich and varied offering deposits, as for the cases of the largest tomb, 248, which is a single chamber tomb, and the case of the multi-chamber tomb, 464 to 467. We may say that the integration of macro and micro analysis demonstrated to be highly beneficial for the analysis of the funerary evidence on a community perspective. Bioarchaeological approaches, including ancient DNA and paleodietary reconstruction by means of stable isotope and osteological examination of human skeletal remains, have provided so far important data to reconstruct subsistence economy. Paleodietary analysis has indicated a predominant terrestrial-based diet with consumption of C3 plants like cereals and pulses, and a variable intake of proteins from animals feeding this ecosystem. Significantly, a major access to animal proteins have been recorded for male individual, and specifically the highest level for male individual buried in the richest tomb, 248 mentioned above. And this, we can say, gender inequality, if we can define it as such, far from being unexpected, and we can thank Mafalda to recall it, finds further evidence at Erimi, and I'm going to tell you about in the next minutes, while we are moving to the final stage of Erimi life history and talk about abandonment practices. 2 interesting evidence of abandonment strategies have been recovered from residential and the workshop complex. The first evidence is represented by the atypical occurrence of human skeletal remains in the abandonment sequence of the residential unit T31 in area T3. This is a roughly rectangular roof space. A single phase of occupation has been detected within the room, with a well-preserved grey clay floor directly lying on the Havara bedrock. The inner space of the room is equipped by a set of standard installation like square and elliptical bases, pots and placements, and a possible grinding installation, features that are commonly related to daily domestic activities at Erimi. But in the northeastern section of the unit, opposite to the doorway and close to a rectangular basin, a human skeletal remains belonging to 2 individuals have been found out. Individual 1 is the best preserved. The skeleton was in a contracted position, prone with the face down in a yellow silty clay deposit, which had been traced all over the grey floor. The skull was placed against the rectangular basin, and the lower long bones, femur and tibia were extending toward the south. Anthropological analysis revealed that these are the remains of a young woman with an age at that between 15 and 18 years old. Interestingly, the skull shows a diamond-shaped bone defect. Such a defect shows a clear and neat outer edge and a smooth inner edge, possibly caused either by a projectile point or by an intentional perimortem drilling. Taphonomic alteration heavily impacted the margins of the lesion, so that the distinction between perimortem lesion or postmortem bone loss is a challenging evaluation. It is interesting to note that two red polished small hemispherical balls are most probably associated to this deposition. One of them was found near the skull of individual 1, while the second one was found placed within the rectangular basin. These intramural burials identified at Erimi as a few comparative cases in coeval early Middle Bronze Age context in a few sites like at Marchie Alonia, Sotira Caminudia, and Alhambra Mutes. The occurrence of these intramural burials suggests a broad horizon of ritual activities that reveal the complexity of meanings attributed to the treatment of the dead in the Middle Bronze Age Cypriot communities. Early and Middle Bronze Age Cypriot communities. It is important to remember that while the practice of intramural burial is largely considered occasional for the EC-MC period, our understanding is strongly biased by the unbalanced nature of the available archaeological record. The ratio between intramural and extramural burials is statistically unreliable given to the disproportionate number of excavated necropolises and settlements. In addition, only a few of the NC and MC settlements investigated may be directly compared with undisturbed coeval cemeteries. Despite the limited sample, a cross-analysis of extramural and intramural burials show a clear trend. If confirmed, however, it would appear that a significant percentage of women between the ages of 15 and 35 years were potentially subject to the intramural interment. Whether the reason for intramural burial, it is clear that cemeteries were not whole community landscape, and that decisions about burial location were governed by notion of exclusion as well as inclusion. Unusual burials may, however, be ambivalent per se. Burial within the settlement may have been intended to keep the deceased close to the living members of the communities, or conversely, at the opposite, far from the dead members of their ancestral communities. The overall picture of the early Bronze Age and primarily its later phase and the Middle Bronze Age Cyprus suggests that the notion of exclusion applied in particular cases is evident, in particular in the case of young women. This appears to indicate a marked breakage of their community's ties and involves evidence for practices which may eventually include also necrophobia. The final evidence I want to present is related to building abandonment practices. Ongoing investigation have evidenced the occurrence of two different abandonment processes in the structures of the residential area and in the workshop complex. While the majority of structures identified in the domestic area show a natural gradual degradation, 6 out of 11 building units in the workshop complex show a fast destruction due to a fire event. Multiscalar analysis conducted on these structures suggest that the fire was most probably lit deliberately. But what are the main evidence in support of this idea? First, ethnographic studies and experimental analysis have demonstrated that construction materials greatly influence the ease with which a structure may burn. And structures made of stones and mud bricks are very difficult to ignite without the use of additional fuel. Therefore, structures like those built at Erimi would not be readily destroyed accidentally. Second, both within the workshop complex and in the residential area, barn structures are not contiguous, as we would expect in the case of an uncontrolled fire spreading from an area and affecting two or more nearby buildings. In the structure examined, the fire is generally confined to the building itself, with few ashes residues and little barn material deposited beyond the exterior walls. It seems, therefore, that precautions were taken to contain the fire under controlled conditions. Third, no episode of reconstruction after the conflagration event have been identified in the building unit analyzed, suggesting that they were abandoned shortly after. Even if an accidental fire was intense enough to damage part of the structure, an effort would have been made to restore it to a usable condition. So the absence of evidence of reconstruction at Erimi reinforces the hypothesis of a plan and deliberate action. The possibility of a deliberate fire is further supported by the suggested reconstruction of the conflagration event in the already mentioned unit SA5, the one with the monolith. The lack of evidence for ignition point on the floor of this building suggests that the surface did not come into direct contact with fire, thus implying that this fire started from the roof, the most flammable part of the structure. On the basis of the available data, it is difficult to associate the conflagration identified in the workshop complex to a specific cause or a specific historic event, let's say, or microhistoric event. While deliberate fire may be associated with episodes of violence to the enemy due to enemy attack or internal strife, there is no supporting evidence for destruction due to conflict at Erimi. The abandonment of the site after the conflagration, which is indicated by the absence of evidence for reconstruction, may support the idea of a planned process. Furthermore, the material assemblage identified within these barn structures shows unusual location and peculiar placement, as for example, a set of intact balls and basins and balls left on the threshold of building unit SA4. In addition, the concentration of artifacts, especially ceramics, is much lower in the naturally degraded buildings of the workshop complex and in the residential units compared to the concentration of materials recovered within the burnt building. Finally, the presence of some specific prestige objects in some of the burnt units may be worth of mention. This is the case for configured ceramic vessels like the goat-shaped ascos from unit SA3 in the workshop complex, and the case for two terracotta molds respectively found in area T2 unit C and area B unit 5. These ones have multiple casts for axe-shaped objects, which may be interpreted as ingots rather than actual tools, and find selected parallels with really analogous, similar dimensions of casts from ECMC context at Marquis, Politico, Trullia, Pyrgos, and Ambelicua. It is interesting to observe that while there is no evidence for metalworking at MC Erimi, these two objects have been previously used and appear to be deliberately left before the units were kept on fire. We may thus argue that the difference in the number and selection of objects recovered in burnt and unburned structures may be a result of different cultural practices, operating during the abandonment, including the deliberate deposition and location and placement of material in building destroyed by fire. As I'm approaching to the conclusion of my talk this evening, I would like to point out a few final considerations of what presented today and its possible broader implication. Whilst it is neither possible to closely reconstruct the significance of this foundation and abandonment practices for the prehistoric Bronze Age communities in Cyprus, nor to understand their symbolic meaning, it is important to emphasize that Middle Bronze Age corresponds with a period of deep cultural, social, and economic changes. Since the initial phases, increasing innovative and wide-ranging developments appear in agrarian production, metallurgy, textile production, and other manufacturing processes. In its latest phases, such significant changes are likely to have more and more impacted the ideological configuration of Cypriot society, producing a transition from household-based structures to communities with supra-household form of organization. Chronologically covering the whole Middle Bronze Age, Erimi may thus contribute in investigating premises, development trends, and evolution of this phenomenon. In this emerging picture, ritual practices could have had a primary importance in defining social identity and affiliation. If you accept that social groups are defined through a set of practices and association, the commemoration of these practices in highly performative events, such as the foundation rituals or the ritual closing down of structure, may have served to inscribe them in the memory. In conclusion, the research applications summarized today are providing us with new multiscalar data for the analysis of the Erimi community in the context of increasing complexity of Middle Bronze Age Cyprus. Specifically, what emerges is a complex of mix of new elements in what appears a traditional framework. Erimi, in fact, was an agripastoral community based on a subsistence economy, but with new increasing forms of specialization and production during the latest phase of Middle Bronze Age. We have not traced any evidence for centralized political power, but new forms of supra-household organization were clearly appearing. The emphasis on a specialized production, the textile production, culminates in the construction of a central workshop, which became a central building to the community. In this process, textile activities were pivotal to the local economy and had a strong impact on the construction of affiliation processes through shared symbols and specifically through shared physical spaces in the workshop complex and in the cemetery. While cemeteries are canonically ritualized spaces in earlier periods of prehistoric Cyprus, as almost in all the Mediterranean area, there is no evidence for discrete ritual spaces in the household records at EC settlement, with few possible exceptions, for example, Marquee Unit 104 and Sotira. It has been suggested that the household itself was a setting for ritual in early Bronze Age village communities. This may have been focused on the domestic hearth and involved the use of secular items of everyday use transformed into ritual tools. Though these diverse spaces and forms of ritual developed during the fundamental social changes of Middle Bronze Age Cyprus, are the ritual forms affected by this social transformation, and how? Looking at Middle Bronze Age Erimi against the background of the social changes we have described in this lecture this evening, we can argue that the central worship complex seems to be the most obvious space to place a ritual setting. This is the core of an enlarged supra-household social organization and the real shared space for the community. From this perspective, while coexistence or ritual setting in funerary and settlement areas remains a permanent feature of this Middle Bronze Age community, a significant shift from household to central communal space, like the central workshop, seems to appear in this very same period. Of course, additional evidence are needed. Additional evidence from coeval contexts may hopefully shed a new light and additional interpretation on these and further facets of this theme, of this time of changes. And I reached the end of my lecture today, so I thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is to stop the sharing. And open up the camera. Thank you.
Well, Luca, we thank you. We thank you for a most challenging lecture. And of course, we need to say that your work in the Kouris River Valley has opened fascinating new venues into the gray zone of the Middle Cypriot era. We also acknowledge the fact that you have state-of-the-art methodology and you analyze your data in an impressive